The Hells Angels biker found the little girl studying symbols in an abandoned radar tower, and one mark shattered his past. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wind howled through the desolate landscape as the Hells Angels biker, Jake, cruised along the long, empty highway. His Harley-Davidson roared beneath him, the rhythmic hum of the engine matching the steady beat of his heart. Jake had always sought solitude, the open road his only true companion. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the horizon. He had no particular destination in mind. He was just running, as he had for years. His mind was a constant battlefield, haunted by memories he'd long tried to bury. As he passed an old, abandoned radar tower standing like a forgotten sentinel against the sky, something caught his eye. A small figure, barely visible through the overgrown weeds, was hunched over in front of the tower. A girl. Curious, Jake slowed his bike and pulled off the road, the gravel crunching beneath his tires. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching in the silence. As he neared, he saw the girl, no older than 10, sitting on the cold stone steps of the tower, studying something intently. Her small hands traced symbols carved into the stone, symbols that seemed oddly familiar, yet out of place in this forgotten ruin. She didn't notice him at first, completely absorbed in her work. Jake stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The girl's presence felt strange, almost otherworldly, in this desolate place. He had spent so many years on the road, never pausing, never stopping to ask why he kept running. But now, something about this moment pulled him in. He took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs as he approached her. "Hey, are you all right?" His voice was gruff, a little too harsh, as if the years of solitude had stripped away the softness from his words. The girl looked up, startled. Her wide eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jake saw something in them, a mixture of fear and wonder. She didn't answer, only stared at him, her small hands still resting on the stone. "What are you doing here?" Jake asked, crouching down to her level, trying to sound less intimidating than he felt. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to one of the symbols on the stone. "This one," she said softly. "It's the mark." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The mark. He had seen it before, many years ago, etched into the walls of his past, in places he had long tried to forget. He had no idea how this little girl could know that symbol, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a coincidence. The wind picked up, and Jake's breath caught in his chest. The girl's words echoed in his mind. The mark. It was a symbol tied to his past, a past that he had spent years trying to outrun. But now, it was here, in front of him, in this abandoned tower, with this strange little girl who seemed to hold the key to everything he had tried to bury. He reached out, his fingers brushing the stone where the girl had pointed. The coldness of it sent a shiver down his spine. The symbol was familiar, yes, but it meant more than just a memory. It meant something that was about to change his life forever. "Where did you learn about this?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl didn't answer. She just stood up and walked to the edge of the tower, her small hand brushing the carved symbols one last time. Jake stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind racing. The mark. The girl. What did it all mean? Why was she here? And why did the symbol feel like a trap he had unknowingly walked right into? He didn't know, but he was going to find out. Jake stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the carved symbol, as the girl quietly stepped back. Her presence felt like an omen, the air thick with unspoken secrets. She didn't move, merely watched him with those wide, knowing eyes. Jake had seen that look before, in people who knew too much about him. Too much about the things he wished he could forget. He had to ask again, "Where did you learn about this symbol?" The girl finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "My grandfather," she said. "He used to tell me stories about it." Jake's heart skipped. Stories. The mark had been tied to his own grandfather, a man who had been a part of the outlaw world Jake had tried so hard to escape. Could it be that this little girl was somehow connected to that past? He had to find out. "Where's your grandfather now?" Jake asked, his voice now edged with urgency. The girl's face softened, and she looked down at the ground. "He died last year," she whispered. Jake's thoughts spun. Her grandfather, the man who had been tied to the same symbol, had died. That meant whatever this was, whatever this symbol represented, was still alive in some way, in some place. "What stories did he tell you about it?" Jake pushed, desperate for answers. The girl hesitated but then met his gaze again. "He said it was a warning. A warning about a treasure, something hidden, something dangerous." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard those stories before, whispered among the old bikers, tales of hidden riches and secret societies. But he had never thought they were real, until now. "And where is it?" "The treasure?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. The girl walked toward him slowly, her fingers brushing over the carved symbols on the stone once more. "He said it was under the tower. Deep inside, beneath the earth." Jake's stomach tightened. Beneath the tower. Could it really be that simple? Could the treasure he had heard about as a young man, something his grandfather had warned him never to seek out, actually be real? He stood up quickly, his mind racing. "We need to get inside," he muttered. The girl nodded and followed him, her steps quick and sure. As they reached the entrance of the tower, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The doors were cracked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Jake had never been one to shy away from danger. But something about this place, something about the way the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, made him uneasy. He pushed the door open further, stepping inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of rot. He could barely make out the shapes of old equipment scattered around the room. But there, in the far corner, was a faint glow coming from a crack in the ground. "There," the girl said, her voice low. Jake walked toward the glow, the sound of his boots echoing in the empty space. As he knelt beside the crack, he felt the weight of years pressing down on him. He had spent so long running, so long trying to escape the ghosts of his past. But now, here they were, pulling him back into the world he had tried to leave behind. The girl stood beside him, watching in silence. Jake hesitated for a moment before reaching into the crack. His fingers brushed against something cold, something metal. He pulled it out slowly, revealing an old, rusted key. The symbol was etched into the surface of the key, just as it had been on the stone. "This is it," Jake whispered, holding the key up to the dim light. The girl looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" she asked. "It's the key to everything," Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. He had found it. After all these years, the treasure, the secret, was finally within his grasp. But as he looked down at the key in his hand, a thought crossed his mind. What if finding the treasure wasn't the end of the story? What if it was only the beginning? The girl spoke again, her voice soft but urgent. "You have to be careful. My grandfather warned me that the treasure isn't just gold or jewels. It's something much more powerful. Something that can destroy everything." Jake's mind raced. What could be so powerful? He had to know more, but the words the girl had spoken echoed in his mind. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about something far darker, something tied to his past, his family. He had found the key, but what would happen when he turned it? Jake stared down at the key in his hand, his mind racing. The girl stood beside him, her small face illuminated by the faint glow from the crack in the ground. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick with the past, the present, and the future all colliding. This key, rusted and old, yet somehow alive with meaning, had been waiting for him. The girl's words echoed in his mind. The treasure isn't just gold or jewels. It's something much more powerful, something that can destroy everything. Jake didn't know what that meant, but he felt it. The key was tied to something bigger than himself, something that stretched back through the years to a time he had buried deep inside. He stood up slowly, the key still clutched in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. The girl's eyes were on him, waiting. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with an urgency that Jake couldn't ignore. He looked around the abandoned radar tower, the space now feeling suffocating. He couldn't stay here. He needed answers. And he knew exactly where to go. Without saying a word, Jake walked toward the exit, the girl following close behind. As they stepped outside into the cold air, Jake's breath clouded in front of him. The night was deepening, the shadows long and stretching across the ground. He mounted his Harley, the engine roaring to life beneath him. The girl hesitated, then climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. "Where are we going?" she asked again, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and concern. "To my old man's cabin," Jake replied. His father had been a mechanic, a tough man with his own set of rules. Jake hadn't been there in years, but he remembered it like it was yesterday. The cabin was where his father had taught him the basics of life, of fixing things, of building. It was also where Jake had first learned about the symbol, the mark that had haunted him since childhood. He hadn't thought about it in years, but now, with the key in his pocket, the memories flooded back. The mark, the key, the treasure. His past had come rushing forward, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. They rode through the night, the only sound the roar of the engine and the wind whipping past them. The girl clung to him, her face buried in his back, but Jake didn't mind. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. When they reached the cabin, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the old wooden structure in front of them. It looked the same as he remembered, quiet and still, tucked away in the woods like it had been for decades. Jake parked the bike and turned off the engine. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, the quiet of the forest settling around them. He got off the bike and walked toward the cabin, the girl following him. He pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The cabin was dimly lit, the shadows stretching across the walls. Jake walked over to a small desk in the corner, dust motes floating in the air. He pulled open the drawer and found what he was looking for, a small wooden box, weathered with age. He had almost forgotten it was there. Inside the box were papers, old maps, and a few personal items that had once belonged to his father. He pulled them out one by one, his fingers brushing over the items with a mix of nostalgia and dread. He stopped when he found the old photograph, a faded picture of his father and a man he didn't recognize. The man had the same symbol on his jacket that Jake had seen in the tower, the same one that had haunted him for years. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His father had been a part of this, a part of whatever this treasure was. Jake felt a wave of anger rise up inside him. "Why didn't you tell me, old man?" he muttered under his breath. The girl stood behind him, her eyes wide as she looked over his shoulder at the photo. "Who is that man?" she asked. Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was, he didn't know. But he was about to find out. The pieces were falling into place, but they were far from the full picture. The key, the symbol, the hidden treasure, it was all part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. He stuffed the photo into his jacket and turned to face the girl. "We need to go to the old garage," he said. The garage was where his father had worked on bikes, where he had spent hours tinkering with engines and mechanical parts. Jake hadn't thought about it in years, but now it felt like the next step in the puzzle. The girl didn't say anything, but Jake could see the curiosity in her eyes. She had no idea what they were about to uncover, but she was in this now. She had been tied to it from the moment they met in the tower. They stepped outside into the cold night, the world around them silent except for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Jake revved the bike again, the engine growling beneath him. The girl climbed on behind him, her hands gripping his waist. They had no idea what they were about to find, but they were about to find it together. Jake's heart was pounding as he and the girl rode through the night, the cold wind slicing through the air, making his face sting. The lights of the old garage finally came into view, a solitary beacon in the midst of the vast darkness. He hadn't been here in years, but it still felt like home in a way, like the weight of all the years of running had finally brought him back to where it all began. He pulled the Harley to a stop in front of the worn-out structure. The garage looked just as it had when he was a boy, though time had not been kind. The wooden frame was sagging in places, the roof had patches of missing shingles, and the once bright red paint had long since faded to a dull, peeling hue. But it was still standing. Jake climbed off the bike, the girl following closely behind, her small hand gripping his sleeve. She didn't speak, but Jake could feel the curiosity radiating off of her. She was as tangled up in this mystery as he was now. They stepped inside the garage, and Jake flicked on the light. It flickered for a moment before casting a dim, yellow glow over the room. The air smelled like oil, metal, and the faint scent of dust. It was quiet, too quiet. The sound of their footsteps was the only thing breaking the stillness. Jake walked over to the far wall where a set of old shelves stood, cluttered with old tools, bike parts, and forgotten knickknacks. His father's tools. His father's life. The girl followed him, her eyes wide as she looked around the room. "What are we looking for?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into one of the drawers and pulled out a dusty, weathered box. He opened it slowly, revealing a series of old photographs, faded and curling at the edges. One of the pictures caught his eye. It was a picture of his father, young and smiling, standing next to a man Jake didn't recognize. The man was wearing a jacket with the same symbol that had haunted Jake for years, the symbol from the tower. Jake's stomach churned. This man, whoever he was, had been a part of his father's life. The question was, what was the connection between this man and the mark? He stared at the photo for a long moment before the girl's voice brought him back to reality. What does it mean, Jake? She asked, her voice full of wonder and fear. Jake closed the box and turned to face her. It means everything, he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. It means that my father was involved in something that he didn't want me to know. He put the photo back into the box and closed it with a snap. But it's time I find out what it is. The girl looked up at him, her expression serious. Do you think it's safe? She asked, her small hands fidgeting nervously. Jake sighed. No, he admitted. But it's too late to turn back now. He felt a strange sense of determination rising in him, pushing him forward. He had spent years running from his past, but now, with the key and the symbol, it was clear that his past was coming for him whether he liked it or not. He had no choice but to face it. We need to find more answers, Jake said, his tone hardening. There's something more to this, something hidden, and I think I know where to find it. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and a strange kind of trust. Where? She asked. Jake paused, his mind racing. There was one place his father had always kept secret, one place that Jake had been forbidden to go when he was younger. It was deep in the woods, an old cabin that his father had always kept locked. He had never told Jake what was inside, but Jake had always suspected that there was something important hidden there. There's a cabin, Jake said finally, his voice low. My father used to go there alone. I think whatever we're looking for is there. The girl nodded, though her face was still filled with uncertainty. Then, we need to go there now, she said, her small voice steady. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the keys to the bike and headed back outside. The night air was even colder now, the wind howling through the trees. He started the bike and revved the engine, the roar of the Harley filling the silence of the night. The girl climbed on behind him once more, her arms wrapping around his waist. As they rode toward the cabin, the weight of what they were about to uncover hung heavy in the air. Jake could feel the tension building inside him, each mile taking him closer to the truth. But as they neared the cabin, a thought crossed Jake's mind. What if this wasn't just about the treasure? What if it was something much darker? He didn't know yet, but he was going to find out. The cabin came into view as the headlights of the Harley sliced through the darkness, cutting a path through the thick trees that surrounded it. Jake could feel the weight of the night pressing in on him, the quiet tension between him and the girl who sat behind him, clutching his jacket. The road had grown rougher the deeper they went into the woods, and now, with the cabin in sight, everything felt even more isolated. Jake pulled the bike to a stop in front of the old cabin, its wooden structure barely visible under the cover of trees. The place looked abandoned, like a part of the forest itself, forgotten and left to decay. But Jake knew better than to assume it was empty. His father had always kept this place under lock and key, a place where secrets had been buried, literally and figuratively. He had always wondered what his father had hidden here, what was so important that it had to be kept so far away from prying eyes. Now, Jake was about to find out. He cut the engine and dismounted the bike, the girl following his lead. As they approached the cabin, Jake felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The porch creaked underfoot as he stepped up, and the door, still hanging on its hinges, groaned in protest when he pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. The floorboards were warped, and the dim light from the flashlights they carried revealed the remnants of a life long gone. Old furniture covered in sheets, shelves of dusty books, and boxes of forgotten belongings scattered the room. But Jake wasn't here for memories. He was here for answers. He walked over to a corner of the room where a small, old-fashioned desk sat against the wall. His father had spent countless hours at this desk, working on something, but what? Jake opened the drawers, one by one, finding nothing but old papers, maps, and tools that seemed to have no real purpose. But then, beneath the pile of papers in the last drawer, he found it. A small, metal box, locked tight. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he reached for it. He had always known there was something here, something hidden away that he hadn't been allowed to see. His fingers trembled as he turned the box over in his hands. The lock was simple, just a small brass latch. Without a second thought, he broke it open. Inside, wrapped in an old, worn cloth, was a stack of photographs and a letter, both yellowed with age. Jake slowly unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the faded ink. It was from his father, addressed to Jake himself. The words on the paper were familiar, but the weight of their meaning hit him like a ton of bricks. Jake, if you are reading this, then you've found what I've kept hidden from you. The mark, the treasure, it's not what you think. It was never about money or jewels. It was about power. Power that could destroy everything, including you. I've made mistakes, and now it's time for you to make your choice. Take the key, find the symbol, and uncover the truth. But remember, the price of this knowledge may be more than you can afford. Jake's hand shook as he read the last words. His father had known about the key, the symbol, and the treasure all along. But the power his father had warned him about, what was that? And why had his father kept this from him for so long? The girl, who had been standing silently behind him, now stepped forward. What does it mean? She asked, her voice trembling. Jake looked at her, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew one thing. It meant everything was about to change. It means we're not done yet, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. He reached into the box and pulled out a photograph, a black and white image of a man standing in front of an old, crumbling building. The man was holding a similar key, just like the one Jake had found. It was his father. Jake recognized that much, but the building in the photo, Jake had never seen it before. The girl stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied the photo. Do you know where that is? She asked. Jake shook his head. I don't, but I'm going to find out. He shoved the photo into his jacket and stood up. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The pieces were falling into place, but there were still so many unanswered questions. What was the symbol? What was the power his father had warned him about? And most importantly, what was the cost of finding the truth? Jake wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers, but he couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close. Let's go, Jake said, his voice firm. There's more to this story, and I'm going to find it, no matter what it takes. The girl nodded, a determined look in her eyes. Jake didn't know how much further they could go, but he knew one thing for sure. The search for the truth was just beginning. And with every step, the past, the present, and the future were all coming together in ways he couldn't have predicted. Jake and the girl rode through the night, the sound of the Harley's engine cutting through the otherwise silent forest. The wind howled as they sped along the dirt road, the tires kicking up small rocks and dust. Jake's mind raced with the photographs, the letter, and the cryptic warning from his father. The power his father had written about, the one that could destroy everything. What was it? And why had it been hidden all these years? As they neared the destination, the cabin ahead of them loomed in the distance, barely visible through the thick fog that had rolled in. The headlights of the bike illuminated the faint outline of the building, casting long shadows over the rough wooden structure. This was it, the place Jake had been avoiding for so long. But now, with the key and the weight of his father's past pressing down on him, he knew he had no choice but to face it. He pulled the bike to a stop and dismounted, the girl following his every step. They stood in front of the cabin, staring at the door that was slightly ajar. Jake felt the years of avoidance catch up with him. His father had spent so many nights here, alone, working on things Jake had never understood. The weight of the history between them settled heavily on Jake's shoulders. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the girl close behind him. The cabin was dark, only the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. Dust hung in the air, and the silence was thick, as though the place hadn't been touched in years. The smell of old wood and forgotten memories filled Jake's nostrils. It felt like walking into the past. He moved cautiously through the cabin, his eyes scanning the room. Everything was just as he remembered. Old furniture, shelves lined with books, and a large workbench in the corner covered with tools. It was almost as if his father had just stepped away for a moment. But Jake knew better. His father had left this place behind, and now it was up to Jake to uncover the secrets that had been buried here. He walked to the workbench and started sifting through the papers that were scattered across the surface. His fingers brushed over maps, old motorcycle schematics, and documents that seemed irrelevant. But then, something caught his eye. Beneath the pile of papers, he found a small, weathered notebook. He opened it, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was familiar, it was his father's. As he read through the pages, Jake's heart sank. The notebook was filled with notes about the symbol, the mark that had haunted him for years. His father had been obsessed with it, documenting its meaning, its power, and the treasure it led to. But the last few pages were different. They were filled with warnings about the dangers of seeking the treasure and the power it held. The mark isn't just a symbol, Jake read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. It's a key to something much bigger. But unlocking it comes with a price. A price I'm afraid I won't be able to pay. Jake felt the weight of the words pressed down on him. His father had known. He had known the power of the mark and the treasure it led to, and he had tried to keep it hidden. But now, the truth was out, and Jake was about to discover it. He closed the notebook and stood up, his mind spinning. The girl had been standing silently in the doorway, watching him. Her eyes were wide, filled with both curiosity and concern. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jake looked at her, a mixture of uncertainty and resolve in his eyes. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I think we're about to find out." He walked to the far wall, where a large, dusty map was pinned. The map was old, its edges frayed and torn, but it was clear enough to make out the markings. Jake traced his finger along the path that led from the cabin to an area marked with a bold X. It was deep in the forest, in a place Jake had never been. His father had mapped it out, but never mentioned it to Jake. "This is where it all leads," Jake said, his voice low. "The treasure, the power, it's here." The girl stepped forward, looking at the map. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with both fear and excitement. "I don't know," Jake repeated. "But whatever it is, it's going to change everything." He grabbed the map and folded it carefully, tucking it into his jacket. The key was still in his pocket, heavy with meaning. It was time to go to the X, time to uncover what had been hidden for so long. The girl looked up at him, her eyes full of determination. "Then let's go," she said. Jake didn't hesitate. He knew this was the moment when everything would be revealed. But as he turned to leave, a cold feeling washed over him. The mark, the treasure, the power, it was all connected. But what if it was too much? What if the price was more than they could pay? The questions gnawed at him, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. They had come this far. Now, they had to finish what had been started so many years ago. Jake and the girl rode deeper into the forest, the moon now high in the sky, casting an eerie glow through the trees. The air was thick with anticipation, the quiet of the woods pressing in around them. The only sound was the low growl of the Harley's engine and the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. Jake's mind raced, still trying to piece together everything he had uncovered. The map, the notebook, the symbol. The mark was leading them to something bigger than either of them could have imagined, and Jake wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead. The girl, who had remained quiet for most of the ride, spoke up again. "Do you think it's really here?" Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of fear in it. Jake glanced over his shoulder at her, her small figure clinging tightly to him. She seemed so fragile, so innocent, yet here she was, caught up in a mystery that could tear everything apart. "I don't know," Jake said, his voice grim. "But we've come this far. There's no turning back now." They rode in silence for a while longer, the path becoming narrower and more treacherous as they approached the marked location on the map. The trees had grown denser, the air colder, and Jake's senses were on high alert. This was the moment when everything would change. He could feel it in his bones. As they reached the clearing, Jake slowed the bike to a stop. The moonlight illuminated a small, dilapidated building in the center of the clearing. It was barely standing, its wooden frame rotting away, and the roof had caved in on one side. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Jake's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the place his father had been trying to keep him away from. He dismounted the bike and motioned for the girl to follow him. The air was thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating. They approached the building cautiously, Jake's hand on the key in his pocket, the weight of it almost unbearable. The girl stayed close behind him, her footsteps barely audible in the thick underbrush. As they reached the door, Jake hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was the moment. He pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the darkness was nearly complete, only faint slivers of moonlight shining through the cracks in the walls. The air smelled musty, like old wood and dust. It was a place forgotten by time. Jake stepped inside, his boots creaking on the floorboards. The girl followed closely behind, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The room was sparse, but in the corner, Jake noticed a large wooden chest, its surface covered in layers of dust. The chest was old, its wood warped from years of neglect, but it was unmistakable. This was what they had been looking for. The treasure. He walked toward it, his heart pounding in his chest. His fingers brushed over the lid of the chest, feeling the cool wood beneath his touch. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. Was he ready for this? Was he ready to uncover the truth about his father, about the mark, and about the treasure that had been hidden away for so long? With a deep breath, he opened the chest. Inside, there were no piles of gold or glittering jewels. Instead, there was a collection of old papers, journals, and photographs. Jake's hands shook as he picked up one of the journals. It was his father's handwriting, unmistakable and precise. As he flipped through the pages, the words began to make sense. The treasure wasn't about wealth or power, it was about knowledge. The journals detailed his father's involvement in the secret society that had used the symbol, the mark, to protect an ancient secret. A secret so dangerous that his father had kept it hidden from the world. Jake's stomach turned as he read. His father had been a part of something dark, something that could destroy everything Jake had ever known. But what was the secret? And why had it been hidden here, in this forgotten place? As Jake sifted through the papers, the girl spoke again, her voice trembling. What does it mean, Jake? What's the secret? Jake closed the journal and turned to face her. Her eyes were filled with fear and uncertainty, but there was a strength in her gaze, a strength that reminded him of his father. I don't know, Jake admitted, his voice rough. But I think we're about to find out. He took the key from his pocket and examined it in the faint moonlight. It was old, but there was something about it that felt significant. He could feel the weight of its meaning. It wasn't just a key, it was the key to unlocking everything. We need to go deeper, Jake said, his voice low. There's more here, something we haven't found yet. We need to keep looking. The girl nodded, a determined look crossing her face. She was ready to face whatever came next, just like Jake was. Together, they would uncover the truth about the treasure, the mark, and the dark legacy that had been passed down to Jake. But as they continued to dig through the chest, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he glanced over his shoulder, his heart racing. Something was wrong. Someone was watching them. Jake's heart raced as he turned toward the dark corner of the cabin, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. The air seemed to grow colder, the silence more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. The girl, sensing his tension, stepped closer to him, her eyes wide with concern. She had been so quiet, so focused on the chest, but now, even she could feel it, the change in the air, the sense that they were no longer alone. Jake slowly reached for the flashlight on the workbench, flicking it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the dusty corners of the room, but it wasn't enough. It felt like something, or someone, was watching them, hidden in the shadows. He tried to shake the feeling off, but it clung to him like a heavy weight. Stay close, Jake muttered, his voice low. The girl nodded silently, her footsteps almost soundless as she followed him across the room. Jake's hand tightened around the flashlight as they approached the farthest corner of the cabin, where a large, tattered curtain hung over a broken window. His instincts were screaming at him to turn back, to leave this place, but he couldn't. Not now. Not when he was so close to the truth. As he drew the curtain aside, the beam of the flashlight revealed something unexpected, a door. It was small and hidden behind the drapes, almost as if it had been purposely concealed. The wood was old, warped with age, but the lock on the door was new. What the hell? Jake muttered under his breath. The girl stood behind him, peering over his shoulder. What's in there? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake didn't answer. His mind was racing. This was it. Whatever was hidden behind this door was what he had been searching for. It was why his father had kept this cabin locked up for so many years, why he had warned Jake about the treasure, the power it held. He reached for the lock, feeling its cold metal under his fingers. For a moment, he hesitated. Should he open it? Was he ready for whatever lay beyond? The girl's gaze was fixed on the door, her face filled with both fear and curiosity. Jake turned the key in his pocket and took a deep breath. "We need to know," he said, his voice resolute. With a soft click, the lock turned, and the door creaked open. What they found inside was nothing like Jake had expected. The room beyond was small, its walls lined with shelves of books, old maps, and ancient artifacts. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate pedestal, on top of which rested a single object, an intricately carved box. The box was old, much older than anything else in the room, and it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward. This was it. This was the treasure his father had hidden away. The girl, sensing the significance of the moment, reached out a trembling hand. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Jake nodded, unable to speak. He had always known that there was something more, something beyond the maps and the journals, but this was the heart of it. The key in his pocket seemed to grow heavier as he approached the pedestal. The box was calling to him, its secrets beckoning. He reached out and gently lifted the box, feeling its weight in his hands. As soon as his fingers touched it, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder still, and the silence was broken by a faint, distant sound, a low hum, almost like a warning. The girl stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. "Jake, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. But Jake didn't answer. He was too focused on the box in his hands, too absorbed in the overwhelming sense that they had just unlocked something much bigger than they realized. He slowly opened the box. Inside, there was no gold, no jewels, no treasure in the traditional sense. Instead, there were papers, old, yellowed pages filled with strange symbols, codes, and diagrams. Jake's heart pounded as he sifted through the papers, his hands shaking with excitement and fear. The symbols, he recognized them. They were the same as the ones he had seen in the tower, the same ones his father had studied. The power his father had warned him about was here, hidden in these pages, locked away for a reason. "This isn't what I expected," Jake whispered. The girl peered over his shoulder, her face filled with confusion. "What is it?" she asked. Jake didn't know how to explain it, how to make sense of the chaos that was unfolding before him. The papers in the box weren't just drawings, they were instructions. Instructions on how to unlock the true power of the mark, on how to use the symbols to gain control over something far greater than wealth. But at what cost? The room seemed to grow darker, and Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew that what they had found wasn't just a treasure, it was a weapon, and it was a weapon that could destroy everything. The girl stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. "Jake, we need to leave. This isn't safe." But Jake didn't listen. He was already consumed by the papers, by the truth they revealed. The power was within his reach, and it was up to him to decide how to use it. But as the room seemed to grow colder, darker, Jake knew one thing for sure. Once he opened this door, there would be no going back. Jake stood still, the papers in his hands trembling as the weight of their meaning settled in. The room around him felt colder now, the hum from earlier growing louder, more intense. The symbols on the pages, this was the power his father had warned him about. This was what had been hidden away, buried for years, and Jake had just unlocked it. The girl, sensing the shift in the air, stepped closer, her voice shaky. "Jake, we need to leave. This doesn't feel right." Jake looked up at her, his face pale. He had always trusted his instincts, but now they were screaming at him. This was no longer just about uncovering a family secret. It was about something much bigger, something darker. "We can't leave," Jake said, his voice tight. This is what my father was trying to protect me from. This is what he kept hidden." He glanced down at the papers again, his mind racing to understand the full scope of what he was holding. The symbols, the diagrams, the instructions, they weren't just ancient texts. They were the key to something far more powerful, something that could change everything. But at what cost? "I have to know more," Jake muttered, more to himself than to the girl. The girl backed away slightly, her face filled with fear. "Jake, you don't know what you're dealing with. This could destroy everything." Jake didn't reply immediately. Instead, he continued flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning each one, trying to make sense of the cryptic instructions. The symbols seemed to tell a story that Jake was only just beginning to understand. As he read, a terrible realization dawned on him. The power contained in these pages wasn't something that could be controlled. It was something that, once unlocked, would consume everything in its path. The more Jake read, the more he understood. The treasure wasn't gold, it wasn't wealth. It was knowledge that had been hidden for a reason. The kind of knowledge that could tear the world apart. His father had known the risks, had known that the power contained in these symbols was too dangerous to be uncovered. But now, it was too late to stop. The door had already been opened. The girl's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Jake, we have to leave. Now, please." Jake looked at her, the urgency in her voice cutting through the fog in his mind. He wanted to listen, to leave this place, but something kept him rooted to the spot. The mark, the key, the power, it was all within his reach. All he had to do was unlock it. But was he ready to pay the price? The girl grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "Jake, I don't want to lose you to this. You have to walk away." The words stung, but Jake knew she was right. He had always been a man of action, always pushing forward, never looking back. But now, in this moment, he had to decide whether the cost of this knowledge was worth it. Could he control what he had just unlocked, or would it destroy him, just like it had destroyed so many others before him? For the first time in his life, Jake wasn't sure of the answer. "I don't know what to do," Jake admitted, his voice shaky. "I feel like I've opened something that I can't close." The girl's face softened, and for a moment, Jake saw the fear in her eyes turn into something else, something more. She wasn't just scared for herself. She was scared for him. She cared. "Jake," she said softly, "you're not alone. We can face this together." Jake met her gaze, her words sinking in. He had always been alone, running from his past, from the things that haunted him. But now, with her standing by him, he realized that he didn't have to face this alone. He didn't have to carry the burden of this discovery by himself. Slowly, he closed the book and placed it back in the box, the weight of it still heavy in his hands. "You're right," he said quietly. "I can't do this alone. We'll figure it out, together." But as Jake closed the box, the hum from earlier grew louder, almost deafening now. He turned to the girl, his expression hardening. "We don't have much time. Something's happening. We need to leave before it's too late." The girl's eyes widened in fear, and she looked toward the door. Jake grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the exit. The ground beneath them began to tremble, the air growing thicker with every step. The room, the cabin, the entire building seemed to come alive, as if reacting to the knowledge Jake had just uncovered. They ran out the door, the ground shaking beneath them, and Jake knew that whatever they had unleashed was not done with them yet. They had opened the door to something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And now, there was no going back. Jake and the girl ran through the forest, the tremors beneath their feet growing stronger with each passing second. The trees around them swayed as if caught in an unseen storm, their branches creaking and groaning under the pressure of whatever force was awakening. The girl, her face pale with fear, kept close to Jake, her breath quick and shallow as she stumbled through the thick underbrush. Jake's mind raced. The hum, the trembling, the oppressive feeling in the air, something was happening. He had no idea what they had just unleashed, but he knew one thing. It wasn't done with them yet. As they pushed through the dense woods, the air became heavier, thick with an unnatural energy that made the hairs on the back of Jake's neck stand on end. It was as if the forest itself was alive, reacting to the knowledge they had uncovered. "Jake, what is that?" The girl's voice trembled, her eyes wide as she looked behind them. Jake didn't have to turn to know what she meant. The shadows in the forest seemed to twist and move, as if something was following them, something that had been waiting, biding its time. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, his voice firm but tinged with a hint of urgency. They had to get out of the woods. Whatever it was that had been set in motion, it wasn't safe to stay. They pushed forward, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the distant rumble of the ground beneath them. Every step felt like it was taking them deeper into something unknown, something dangerous. The girl stumbled once more, and Jake caught her by the arm, steadying her. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and reassuring, though the unease in his gut was growing. They were almost out of the woods, but the darkness seemed to be closing in on them from every side. The trees, the shadows, everything around them felt suffocating. It wasn't just the physical darkness. It was the weight of the power they had uncovered, the knowledge of the mark that had been hidden for so long. They had unleashed something ancient, something that had been kept secret for a reason. And now, it was coming for them. As they neared the edge of the forest, a sudden crash echoed through the trees. Jake stopped dead in his tracks, his heart leaping into his throat. The girl gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" she whispered. Jake's hand instinctively went to the knife at his side, his body tense and alert. He scanned the darkness, but there was nothing but the faint rustling of the trees and the distant, unsettling hum that seemed to be coming from the ground itself. Then, another crash, closer this time. Jake's instincts screamed at him to move, to get the girl out of there before whatever was coming found them. "Run!" Jake shouted, grabbing the girl's hand and pulling her toward the clearing ahead. But before they could take another step, a shadow moved in front of them, blocking their path. Jake froze, his hands still gripping the girl's, his eyes locked on the figure standing before them. It was a man, tall and imposing, dressed in black from head to toe, his face hidden beneath a hood. His presence felt suffocating, like a dark cloud had descended over the clearing. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The man didn't answer immediately. He stood there, motionless, his dark eyes hidden beneath the hood. Jake could feel the weight of his gaze, like the man was looking right through him. Then, slowly, the man spoke, his voice low and almost mechanical. "You shouldn't have come here." The words sent a chill through Jake's body, but he didn't back down. "What do you want?" Jake asked, his grip tightening on the girl's hand. The man took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. "You've disturbed something that was never meant to be found," he said. "And now, you'll pay the price." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had known this wasn't going to be easy, but he hadn't expected this. Whatever this man was, he wasn't just a stranger in the woods. He was part of it, part of whatever was tied to the mark and the power Jake had unlocked. The girl squeezed Jake's hand, her voice shaking as she whispered, "Jake, we need to run." Now, Jake glanced at her, then back at the man in front of them. The man took another step closer, his body moving with unnerving grace, like he was part of the night itself. "You're too late," the man said, his voice cold and final. "You've already awakened it. And now, it will claim what's left." Jake felt a surge of panic, but he couldn't let it control him. He had to protect the girl. He had to protect himself. With a swift motion, he pulled the girl behind him, positioning himself between her and the man. "We're not going anywhere with you," Jake said, his voice low but firm. The man tilted his head, almost amused. "You don't have a choice." Without warning, the man moved. In an instant, he was upon them, his speed unnatural, his movements fluid and almost otherworldly. Jake barely had time to react as the man's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with terrifying strength. Jake tried to break free, but the man's grip was like iron. "Let her go," Jake shouted, struggling against the man's hold. But the man only tightened his grip, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice barely a whisper now. "You've already lost." Jake struggled to free himself from the man's iron grip, the words, "You've already lost," echoing in his mind. The pressure in his wrist felt like it was going to snap, but he refused to show weakness. The girl, trembling behind him, watched helplessly, her face pale as she clung to the hope that Jake could fight this man off. "Let go of me," Jake growled through gritted teeth, using every ounce of strength he had to twist his wrist. But the man's grip tightened. Jake's heart raced, the fear rising in his chest, but he didn't back down. His mind was racing, thinking of his next move. He wasn't going to let this man, this agent of whatever dark power was hunting them, take them without a fight. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Jake twisted his body, pushing the man off balance. For a brief moment, the man loosened his grip just enough for Jake to break free. Jake spun around and kicked the man back, using the momentum to put some distance between them. The man stumbled but quickly regained his composure, his eyes narrowing as he stepped toward Jake once more. The girl gasped in fear. "Jake, we need to get out of here. He's too strong." Jake's eyes were wild with determination, his pulse pounding in his ears. He knew she was right, but there was no way he was running. Not when they were this close to the answers. "Stay behind me," he said through clenched teeth. He backed up slowly, keeping the man in his sight. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice thick with defiance. The man smiled darkly, and for a moment, Jake thought he saw something unnatural in his eyes. "You don't need to know my name," the man replied, his voice low and filled with disdain. "What matters is that you've awakened something that should have stayed buried." Jake's grip on his knife tightened, but he didn't draw it just yet. "What is it?" he spat. "What do you want with us?" The man tilted his head, as though considering Jake's question. "What I want doesn't matter," he said coldly. "You should be asking yourself what you're willing to sacrifice to stop what's coming." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The man's words hit harder than anything physical could. He knew deep down that this wasn't just about a hidden treasure anymore. It wasn't just about the symbol or the mark. It was about a greater, darker force, one that had been unleashed and was now coming for them. He could feel it in his bones. The girl, still trembling, pulled at his sleeve. "Jake, let's go," she whispered urgently. "We can't stop this." Jake looked down at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. She had no idea what they were dealing with, but Jake could feel it. The dark power that was unfolding, the past that had come crashing into their lives. "I can't leave," he said quietly. "Not now? We've come too far." He turned back to face the man, his voice unwavering. "You don't scare me. Whatever you're trying to protect, I'm going to stop it. We're going to finish this." The man's expression darkened, and he took a step forward. "You don't understand," he hissed. "The power you've unlocked cannot be undone. You've released something ancient, something that was meant to stay buried." Jake's blood ran cold. He had known it was dangerous, but now, hearing the man's words, he understood that this wasn't just a matter of treasure or power. It was a force beyond their control. "What is it?" Jake demanded again. "What is this power you keep talking about?" The man's lips curled into a smile, but it was not one of triumph. It was a smile of pity, as though he already knew the answer. "The power is not in the treasure," he said slowly, almost as if savoring the moment. "It's in the knowledge of how to control the mark, how to unlock the secrets of the past, and with that knowledge, destroy everything in its path. That's the price you're paying." Jake's stomach churned as the weight of the man's words settled over him. They had unleashed something they couldn't understand, something that could tear the world apart. "You'll never stop it," the man continued. "And soon, you'll be just another casualty of your own curiosity." The man lunged forward, but Jake was ready this time. With a swift motion, he ducked under the man's arm, using the momentum to spin around and push him back. But the man was faster than Jake had anticipated. He twisted out of Jake's grasp and slammed him into the ground, the impact knocking the breath out of him. The girl screamed, and Jake felt her hands gripping his arm, trying to pull him up. "Jake," she cried. "We have to go now." Jake's vision blurred for a moment, but he knew she was right. He couldn't fight this man head-on, not when the stakes were so high. He had to think. As the man closed in on him again, Jake's mind raced. The key, the symbol, everything he had uncovered, it was all leading to this moment. They had unlocked something that was far too dangerous to contain, and now, it was coming for them. "Run!" Jake shouted at the girl. "Get to the bike. I'll hold them off." The girl hesitated, fear etched on her face, but Jake grabbed her arm, pushing her toward the clearing. "Go," he urged. She ran, her footsteps fading into the distance as Jake faced the man one last time. He wasn't ready to die. He wasn't ready to lose. Not when he had come this far. With a deep breath, Jake pulled the knife from his side, gripping it tightly. The man didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. But so did Jake. And he wasn't backing down. Jake's heart pounded as he watched the man approach, the knife gripped tightly in his hand. The air between them was thick with tension, the silence almost deafening. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He needed to protect the girl. He needed to stop this man. And he had to figure out what was coming next. The man didn't move quickly, but each step was measured, deliberate. He knew he had control of the situation, and that made Jake's blood run colder. "You're wasting your time," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "You can't fight what's already been set in motion." Jake stood tall, the weight of his father's legacy heavy on his shoulders. "You don't get to decide that," he shot back, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only malice. "I'm not the one who decided," he said, his words almost a whisper now. "The power's already out. And soon, it will be too late to stop it." Jake's mind raced. What was this man talking about? The power? The mark? His father had always warned him, but now, the reality of it all was crashing down around him. Everything he had thought he understood about his past, about the mark, about the treasure, it was all shifting, turning into something darker. What do you want? Jake asked, his voice almost pleading now. Why are you doing this? The man's eyes gleamed in the low light, and he took another step closer. What I want doesn't matter, he said coldly. You've already set it in motion. All I'm doing is cleaning up the mess. Jake clenched his jaw, the grip on his knife tightening. He couldn't let this man take the girl, take what was left of the answers, without a fight. His hand reached into his jacket and pulled out the key, the weight of it heavier now than ever before. The man's eyes flicked to it, his face momentarily betraying something. Fear? Jake wasn't sure, but it was enough to make him hesitate. What does this key unlock? Jake asked, his voice low. The man's expression didn't change, but the tension in the air seemed to thicken. You really don't know? The man asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. That's the key to the power. You're holding the means to control it, to destroy everything. But you won't use it. You can't. You don't understand it. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Control it? Destroy everything? Was this really the truth? The man was talking like he knew exactly what was going to happen next, like he knew the cost of everything Jake had uncovered. But Jake couldn't back down now. You don't control me, Jake said, his voice hardening. You don't control anything. The man smiled again, but it was empty. You think you have a choice? He asked, his voice suddenly dark. You think you can just walk away from this? It's already too late. Before Jake could react, the man lunged at him, moving faster than Jake could have anticipated. But Jake was ready this time. He sidestepped just as the man reached for him, using his own momentum to twist his arm and send him crashing into a nearby wall. The man groaned, but before Jake could move in for another strike, the ground beneath them suddenly trembled again. This time, it was different. This tremor felt like a warning, like the earth itself was reacting to something, some ancient force stirring beneath their feet. The man, recovering quickly, looked at Jake, his face twisted with both fear and something else, recognition. You don't understand what you're dealing with, the man hissed, his voice urgent. You think you can stop it, but you can't. Jake didn't answer. He was too focused on the rumbling beneath him. The girl, still behind him, grabbed his arm. Jake, she said, her voice shaking. Something's happening. Jake turned to her, but the moment he did, he felt it. A wave of pressure, as if something immense was rising from the ground. It was more than just physical. It was a feeling deep in his chest, a sense of dread that gnawed at him from the inside out. The man, now on his feet again, stepped back, eyes wide with realization. It's coming, he muttered, almost to himself. The power you've unlocked. It's here. Jake's heart skipped. He looked back at the man. What do you mean it's here? The man didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the ground beneath them. The rumbling was getting worse now, the entire cabin shaking, the floor beneath them cracking. We need to get out of here, Jake said, his voice sharp, pulling the girl away from the man. But before they could make it to the door, the entire cabin seemed to implode in on itself. The walls cracked, the beams splintered, and the roof began to collapse, dust and debris falling around them. Jake pulled the girl to the side, shielding her as best as he could, his eyes scanning the chaos around them. The man, still standing, was now consumed by the force, his body convulsing as if something was trying to pull him under. No, the man cried out, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise. It's too late. You've released it. With one final, desperate scream, the man vanished into the ground, swallowed up by the very power he had warned Jake about. Jake grabbed the girl and ran, pushing through the debris, his mind screaming at him to escape. They were being pulled into something far darker than either of them had realized. The power was rising, and they had no idea how to stop it. Jake and the girls stumbled through the wreckage of the cabin, the dust and debris swirling around them like a storm. The air was thick with the aftermath of the explosion, the sound of the earth cracking beneath their feet echoing in the distance. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest as he grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her toward the opening in the wreckage, his mind still reeling from the force that had just shattered the cabin. His mind raced, but there was no time to think. They had to get out. They had to survive. The girl, Her face pale and her eyes wide with fear, stumbled behind him, struggling to keep up. But Jake didn't slow down. The power that had been released was still rising, still threatening to consume everything in its path. They had to leave before it was too late. As they emerged from the collapsing cabin, Jake looked around, his eyes scanning the horizon. The forest, the world around them, seemed to be shifting. The trees were swaying unnaturally, and the ground beneath their feet was still trembling. Jake didn't know how much longer they had before the power that had been unleashed reached its peak. But one thing was clear, everything was changing, and it wasn't just the world around them. It was them too. The girl, still gripping Jake's hand, looked up at him with wide eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake shook his head, not having the answers. "I don't know," he said, his voice hoarse. "But we can't stop now. We have to keep moving." The world around them felt like it was collapsing, like everything they knew was being swallowed up by the power they had uncovered. But Jake couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. They ran, pushing through the dense forest, the trees closing in around them. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood and the remnants of the chaos they had just witnessed. The earth continued to tremble, the noise of the power growing louder with each step they took. The girl stumbled once again. But Jake didn't hesitate. He pulled her up, his grip tightening around her hand as they pushed forward, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. "We can't keep running," the girl said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to face it." Jake turned to her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I know," he said, his voice filled with determination. "But not yet. We need to find out how to stop it before it's too late." As they continued deeper into the forest, Jake's mind raced. The mark, the treasure, the power, everything was connected. And now, it was up to him to figure out how to stop it. The girl was right. They couldn't keep running forever. They had to face whatever was coming, no matter the cost. Jake stopped suddenly, the girl nearly bumping into him. Ahead, through the trees, he could see something, a figure standing in the distance, silhouetted against the dim light of the horizon. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, but Jake knew who it was. It was the man, the one who had been chasing them, the one who had tried to stop them, the man who had warned Jake about the power they had unlocked. But this time, Jake wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let the man dictate his fate any longer. "Stay behind me," Jake said to the girl, his voice low and steady. She didn't argue, her wide eyes locked on the figure ahead. Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the key in his pocket reminding him of everything at stake. As he walked toward the figure, the man finally stepped into the clearing, his face now visible in the faint light. His eyes were cold, and the air around him seemed to crackle with the same unnatural energy Jake had felt earlier. "You're too late," the man said, his voice cold and final. "The power is already beyond your control. You've awakened something that cannot be stopped." Jake's grip tightened around the knife at his side. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice unwavering. The man smirked. "You think you can stop what's already been set in motion?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. "It's not that simple." Jake's eyes burned with determination. "It's never simple," he replied. "But I'm not running anymore. I'm going to finish this." The man took a step forward, but Jake didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. The power, the symbol, the mark, they were all part of the same force, the same ancient evil. And it was up to Jake to stop it. "You're too weak," the man said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You can't control it." Jake's hand tightened around the knife, his thoughts clear. "I don't need to control it," he said. "I just need to stop you." With that, Jake lunged forward, his knife flashing in the dim light. The man stepped back, his eyes widening in surprise. But Jake was faster. In a swift motion, he drove the knife into the man's chest. The man gasped, his eyes wide with shock. He staggered backward, his hands clutching at the wound. "No," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Jake stood over him, his heart still pounding, the weight of everything they had uncovered crashing down on him. The man fell to his knees, his eyes still locked on Jake's. "You don't know what you've done," he whispered, before his body went limp. Jake stood there, breathing heavily, the world around him silent. The girl slowly stepped forward, her hand on his arm. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jake looked down at the man's body, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know if it was over, but he knew one thing. They had won this battle. And for now, that was enough. He looked at the girl, her face filled with both fear and hope. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "But we can't stop now. There's still more to do." Together, they turned and walked into the forest, the weight of the power still hanging in the air, but for the first time, there was a sense of peace between them. They had faced the darkness, and for now, they had survived. In this thrilling adventure of Hell Angel stories, Jake and the girl find themselves caught in a web of danger and ancient secrets. As they unlock the mysteries hidden by Jake's father, they awaken a power that threatens to destroy everything. The Hell Angels stories unfold as they uncover a dark truth about the power of the mark, a symbol that has been buried for generations. As they struggle to understand its meaning and its consequences, they find themselves running from forces they cannot control. In their journey, they encounter a mysterious man who warns them about the dangers of their discovery. With danger closing in, Jake and the girl fight to survive and stop the power that has been set in motion. The Hell Angels stories continue as they face the unknown, unsure if they can control the darkness they've unleashed. The story takes them deep into a hidden world, where every decision has consequences, and the battle between good and evil becomes a fight for survival. Will they be able to stop the power, or will the Hell Angels stories end in tragedy? The mystery of the mark, the treasure, and the forces that lie beyond threaten to tear them apart. Follow Jake and the girl as they navigate through a dangerous path filled with secrets, betrayal, and the overwhelming weight of the past. Will the Hell Angels stories lead them to salvation, or will they be consumed by the power they've uncovered? Join them as they continue their fight to uncover the truth in this intense, action-packed journey.